Donald Trump has nevertheless made the decision to massively expand the war against Iran. At the same time, we have two pieces of news today. The Pentagon, together with the United Kingdom, is organizing a closed meeting of defense ministers and military officials from Western countries dedicated to forming a coalition to protect shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. But essentially, this is preparations for a Western military coalition against Iran. And at the same time, it became known that Donald Trump met with his key advisors to discuss the possible escalation of the military campaign against Iran, considering that Western allies are more favorable this time. For example, the new Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has allowed the Americans to use military bases for strikes against Iran, and the pretext for expanding the war is already in place. American intelligence agencies believe that the new supreme leader of Iran, Mojtaba Khamenei, is showing significantly more willingness to develop nuclear weapons than his father, Ali Khamenei. That's why he needs to be stopped before he carries out his plans. And as you understand, there's no way to do that without a major war. At the same time, analysts note that the conflict between the US and Iran is escalating precisely when both warring sides are reaching the limits of what they can achieve through military force. And that's why the increased involvement of allies could greatly help the United States in the war. And that's why, in general, increased involvement could really help the United States of America. Let's discuss all of this together. My name is Pechii. Let's dive into this topic together, but before we start the episode, I ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel. We're moving towards the 300,000 subscribers, so I would really appreciate your personal subscription. So let me start this episode with the latest news about the situation on the Middle Eastern front. Today, Iran attacked an American military base in Iraq near the city of Erbil in Iraqi Kurdistan. The Iraqi or US authorities have not confirmed the attack yet, but this shows that Iran is trying to expand this war geographically. Previously, Iran mainly targeted Bahrain and Kuwait, then included Jordan and Oman in its strikes, and now it is also striking Iraq. This specifically concerns the American military bases in the region. At the same time, Iran's proxy force, the Yemeni Houthis, struck an oil refinery in Saudi Arabia following Saudi strikes on Yemen. Last night, the Yemeni Houthis from the Ansar Allah movement carried out strikes on the oil refinery and other facilities of the Saudi company Saudi Aramco. It is reported that targets were hit near the cities of Jeddah, Jizan, and Yanbu. Large fires broke out at the sites of the strikes, and this could significantly slow down oil exports. A few hours earlier, Saudi Arabia carried out strikes on Yemen in response to the naval blockade of the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. Saudi Arabia in particular shelled the port of Hodeidah in Yemen, which is controlled by the Houthis from the Ansar Allah group. At the same time, the Houthis themselves reported that they were continuing efforts to maintain the blockade of the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait specifically for ships from Saudi Arabia. In particular, the Torm tanker, which was traveling from Saudi Arabia to Japan, was forced to abandon its passage through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait and will have to go through the Suez Canal, then through the Mediterranean Sea and around Africa to reach the other side. In general, the Houthis have actually started blockading the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, while the Iranians are blockading the Strait of Hormuz. At the same time, the American military has unexpectedly reduced the intensity of strikes on Iran, and this looks more like the calm before the storm. Donald Trump himself stated last night that he has not yet made a decision about launching larger strikes against Iran, and the US president said that in this matter, Washington is supposedly holding negotiations with Tehran at the moment. He also noted that Iran is becoming more and more serious with each passing day, but hinting that the sides might supposedly return to negotiations again. And next, I'll quote Donald Trump. "No, I haven't made a decision yet about increasing the scale of the strikes. We're talking with them right now. I think they're becoming more and more serious with each passing day. I believe this is a smarter process. But the other option is probably easier, to just do what we're doing, and we can take it to a much higher level if we want. We're ready for that. As you know, we're ready and loaded." But this kind of rhetoric from Donald Trump is increasingly starting to look like a distraction. As reported today by the New York Times, American intelligence agencies believe that Iran's new supreme leader, Mojtaba Khamenei, is showing significantly more willingness to develop nuclear weapons than his father, Ali Khamenei. According to the publication, Mojtaba Khamenei has not publicly called for the development of nuclear weapons. However, American intelligence believes that he and the more hardline leadership of Iran that emerged after the war are still seeking to develop advanced nuclear weapons. And so, American intelligence believes that these hawks, the radicals from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps who have taken power into their own hands, have simply decided not to announce it loudly but to do it quietly. Sources for the New York Times note that most of the intelligence information is based on data obtained before the start of the war. After being wounded, Mojtaba Khamenei limited his public activity and communications. However, according to intelligence assessments, he continues to lead the country and still makes some decisions. Although most of these decisions have been taken over by the IRGC, he continues to lead the country and still makes some decisions. But the point is that in recent weeks, Iran has begun actively restoring its nuclear facilities. And one of them, Mount Pechii, where they hide centrifuges for uranium enrichment, has begun to be actively reinforced with concrete and soil to protect them even more from possible future attacks. According to American officials, Iran has moved some of its centrifuges into a well-protected underground complex, known in the US as Pickaxe Mountain, or as Trump calls it, Mount Mountain, in order to preserve the equipment out of reach of American strikes. At the same time, Washington believes that Tehran has not yet resumed uranium enrichment and has not fully restored its nuclear program, but such plans are clearly evident. According to the New York Times, the Donald Trump administration believes that the tougher stance of Iran's new supreme leader could be an additional argument in favor of further escalating the military campaign against Iran. And I would say this is a perfect excuse for escalation on the part of the United States of America, especially since it's not without reason. The American press has been writing more about Mount Pechii and about Iran's renewed focus on nuclear issues. And against this backdrop, it became known that the President of the United States of America, Donald Trump, convened a meeting at the White House with key advisors and military officials, and also members of the cabinet, to discuss with them the possibility of escalating the military confrontation with Iran. At the same time, as I mentioned a little earlier in this broadcast, in his address in the Oval Office, Trump stated that he has not yet made a decision, adding, quote, "We are currently talking with the Iranians. They are getting more serious every day for obvious reasons." Let me remind you, the American-Iranian truce and negotiations broke down about 2 weeks ago, after which hostilities resumed. Israel, which participated in a joint military operation with the US at the end of February, is not involved in the current round of escalation and is not taking part in the negotiations. Earlier, in an interview with Axios, Trump stated that he is considering launching a massive strike, larger than ever before. Quote, "I am close to making a decision. We have everything ready." And then Trump added that Iran hasn't felt enough pain yet to agree to Washington's terms. During the meeting at the White House, possible scenarios for increasing military pressure on Tehran and the potential consequences of further escalation were also discussed. And here it is. Among the main risks, the White House named the following: possible retaliatory attacks by Iran on American assets in the Middle East, including Donald Trump's own properties, and threats to the security of shipping in the Strait of Hormuz area, and the risk of the conflict escalating into a large-scale regional confrontation involving the allies of the US and Iran. But by the way, that's already starting to happen. Trump reviewed the assessments of military leaders, intelligence officials, and members of the administration, but no official decision to expand the military operation was announced. At the same time, sources note that the current stage may become one of the most important moments in the decision-making process since the beginning of the entire war. But Donald Trump's hesitation is also understandable. Iran is already expanding the geography of its strikes, and it's necessary to assess all available forces so as not to escalate even further if there aren't enough forces to respond. And this is where things start to get really interesting. The United States of America and the United Kingdom are planning to hold a high-level meeting in London next week, which will be dedicated to a potential international military coalition to protect maritime shipping in the Hormuz Strait. So the United States of America is still trying to involve European allies in the operation, whom, I remind you, Trump has managed to insult more than once. But it should be understood that the resumption of commercial shipping through the Hormuz Strait is a key element of any U.S. exit strategy from the war with Iran and efforts to stabilize global energy markets. According to European diplomats, the event being convened by the Pentagon could potentially be attended by defense ministers and top military commanders from Western countries and countries in the region. That is, it refers to the countries of the Persian Gulf region. U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dan Kane also plan to attend in person. A White House representative also confirmed that the US and the UK intend to convene such a conference as early as next week. And here's the question: why does the US want to expand the war by involving its allies? It would seem that, if you look at the situation, there haven't been any Iranian attacks on merchant ships in the Strait of Hormuz over the past 4 days. Some representatives of the U.S. Department of Defense claim that the reason is that Iran's military capability in the Strait of Hormuz area was almost completely destroyed as a result of American strikes. They say that Iran would gladly attack, but now there's nothing left to do it with. Other officials state that Iran is still capable of attacking ships in the area, but is also holding its breath in anticipation of an expected escalation. As recently as Wednesday, US President Trump threatened to bomb bridges and power plants, including those in Tehran, if Iran launches new attacks on ships in the Strait of Hormuz. Iran responded with threats against the infrastructure of the Gulf countries, meaning those allied with the US. And after the negotiations between Oman, Iran, and Qatar on a new agreement on this issue ended inconclusively. In early July, these three countries tried to come to some agreement on what to do next with the Strait of Hormuz. Shortly after that, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. He came to Tehran for consultations, and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps immediately began shelling ships in the Strait of Hormuz. But yesterday, on Friday, a delegation from Oman arrived in Tehran again to resume negotiations on a mechanism for reopening the strait. Araghchi stated on Friday that he discussed various initiatives and proposals with his Pakistani counterpart, who is acting as a mediator in the US-Iran negotiations. And then, a quote from Araghchi: "The problem between us and the US is not the lack of a mediator. The problem is America's approach. Iran will not give in to pressure from the US and will defend its interests in the Strait of Hormuz. As long as the legitimate goals and demands of the Iranian people are not met, it is only natural that we will continue on our course." Well, in general, the Iranians are not ready to make concessions despite all the attempts by the US and its allies to reach any kind of agreement. Let me remind you that the Americans have already started hinting that they agree to let Iran charge fees for ships passing through the Hormuz Strait, just so that this money would go into some separate fund, from which apparently the Americans might also get something. And that's why, according to sources, the US now wants to build on the discussions that the UK and France have initiated with various countries in recent months about a potential international military coalition for the Strait of Hormuz. One of the key conditions put forward by many countries is the cessation of hostilities in the strait so that conditions on land are safe enough to conduct an international maritime mission. Sources reported that the US wants its allies to send resources to the regions, such as minesweeping vessels, naval ships, and drones to ensure the safety of shipping lanes. But here's the catch. The Americans have already tried to create their own shipping lane in the Strait of Hormuz along the coast of Oman, and they even guaranteed that if tankers sailed farther from the Iranian coast, they would supposedly protect them. As a result, Iran attacked several such vessels off the coast of Oman, and that's it. The Strait of Hormuz is closed again. In the last 4 days, only 3 ships per day have passed through the entire strait. And the whole point of what's happening now is that the conflict between the US and Iran is escalating precisely at a time when both warring sides are reaching the limits of what they can achieve through military force. The conflict expanded this week after Iran-allied militants in Yemen began striking ships passing through a key choke point in the Red Sea, the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, which helped push oil prices above $100 per barrel for the first time in the past 2 months. The US,
за последние 2 месяца,
in turn, has intensified its bombing campaign in Iran in recent days, striking targets across the country. This is the most intense period of fighting since US President Donald Trump and Israel began broadly bombing Iran at the end of February. But the problem facing Washington and Tehran is that both governments have shown a willingness to escalate. But neither is able to gain a decisive advantage over the other. The stalemate increases the risk that the US and Iran could be drawn into more months of war, as both sides try to build leverage and attract more allies to their side.
This is what I was talking about. The war is no longer just regional.
Trump may escalate further by attacking civilian infrastructure. Iran's bridges and power plants, which will likely provoke Iranian retaliation against globally important energy infrastructure throughout the Middle East. If Trump used tactical nuclear weapons to strike, according to experts, and continued bombing
По одному из подземных атомных.
Iran, it would only be a symbolic strike against the regime.
Because according to experts, it's currently impossible to break through that storage facility.
But this week, Iran showed that it still has some room to maneuver in this conflict, but even that is already shrinking. The Houthi group in Yemen, allied with Iran, announced that it is imposing a naval blockade on Saudi Arabia and threatens shipping in the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, which connects the Red Sea to the Indian Ocean.
Well, we already discussed this topic at the beginning of the program, and in the next episode this evening we will discuss it in more detail.
But the point is that now Iran also seems to have no more escalation options left.
So, they had this hidden trump card, the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait, but now the Houthis have started to block it. What happens next, how to raise the stakes further, is unknown.
The Iranians definitely gained an escalation advantage thanks to the actions of the Yemeni Houthis, but I don't think they have achieved escalation dominance. An advantage, yes, but not dominance, because the US can still choose to strike civilian targets and take the approach of total war, in which they might try to involve the Europeans. And then it becomes quite obvious why the Pentagon is gathering allies for separate talks in London. I'll leave it at that. Share your opinions and conclusions in the comments under this episode, subscribe to this channel, like the episode, and hit the bell icon. If you want to support the work of this YouTube channel, I would be grateful. You can do so by making any donation using the links and details in the description of this video. That's all for now. Take care. Goodbye, everyone.